Can New York Islanders captain Anders Lee bounce back from his slow and disappointing finish to last season and in the playoffs? Or is this the start of a decline for the captain? We've got that and a lot more on today's Locked On Islanders podcast.
Your Locked On Islanders, your daily podcast on the New York Islanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome, everybody, to the Thursday edition of the Locked On Islanders podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On Islanders your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you can get new episodes as soon as they drop. And you can also now hear us on SiriusXM on the SXM app. Just do a search for Locked On Islanders. We have got a lot to discuss on today's show, but first, if there's something Islanders related on your mind, if you have a question for us, maybe a comment about something we've discussed on the show, or a topic you'd like us to analyze on a future episode, send us an email. The email address, lockedonislanders@gmail.com. And if you leave your first name and where you're from, we're happy to mention you on the show when we talk about whatever it is that's on your mind. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Isles, and you can follow me, Gil Martin, on Twitter at Ice Wars, NYRVSNYI. We'll keep you up to date on all the latest Islanders news, notes, and happenings, hirings, firings, trade rumors, free agency, even just rumors about things like retirement. We'll have it all for you right here on the Locked On Islanders podcast between now and the start of training camp, which, believe it or not, we're less than a month away from the start of training camp, 2 months away from the start of the new hockey season. It's closer than you think, and I, for one, am actually starting to get a little excited about the prospect of live hockey being just around the corner. So I know every day, as you know, yesterday on the show, I talked a little bit about we're going to start talking prospects and some of the younger players. We're going to kick that off on tomorrow's show. But I did want to first briefly touch on something that a lot of people have been talking about since late in the season, really. And I think I haven't addressed it enough on the show over the offseason. I've kind of danced around it. I've touched on it, but I haven't really dove headfirst into the meat and potatoes of this particular situation, and that's Captain Anders Lee. And, the thing about Lee is, he is a very important part of this hockey team. He is the captain. He is, in that sense, one of the emotional leaders of this club. There's no question about that. He is experienced. He has been with the team now for 11 seasons. This year will be his 12th. And for the second straight year, he put up 28 goals last year, playing in all 82 games, had 50 points, which, believe it or not, is actually 4 points more than he had the previous season, although he did play in 6 more games. But again, we're talking about, solid, same kind of statistics as he had in the previous year. So, you look at the Islanders' scoring leaders, and obviously we know the Islanders are not the most gifted offensive team, but Anders Lee, second on the team in goals, third on the team in points, just 1 point behind Matthew Barzal, who finished second. And tied for the team lead with 6 power play goals. He is a player, quite honestly, who played an important role on this team. And yet, by the end of the season, when you looked at everything, I think a lot of people were concerned about the poor finish that Anders Lee had. And if you look at the numbers, there's a legitimate reason why people feel that way. If you look at early in the season, Anders Lee was playing some great hockey. He had in the second game of the year, 3 assists against the Ducks. Followed that up with goals in back-to-back games. Then scored 2 goals after one game of not scoring. Scored 2 goals. He was putting up points earlier in the season at a very consistent rate. And then you got down to the home stretch. And down the home stretch, when the Islanders were fighting tooth and nail for that, those 2 wild card spots, and ended up, squeaking into the playoffs. The last 10 games of the season, Anders Lee had 1 goal and 1 assist for 2 points. Not your typical Anders Lee kind of numbers. And he was minus in 5 of those 10 games, including a -3 in the loss to Tampa Bay, -2 in a loss to Buffalo that was potentially very costly. And, when you consider that in the last 10 games, he was only a plus twice, it really wasn't a very strong finish. And then you go to the postseason, and Lee, in 6 games, had 1 goal and no assists and 12 penalty minutes. So while the overall numbers for the season look very Anders Lee-like, with the 28 goals and 50 points, that's more or less what you're going to expect from Lee. Somewhere in the range of 25 to 30, 35 goals, probably closer to 25 to 30, and 45 to 55 points. But the lack of consistency, I think, is a big concern. And the fact that when the games mattered the most, usually you expect more in the clutch from your captain, more leadership by example, more strong play in big moments. And for the first time in a long time, I don't think we saw that from Anders Lee, at least not down the stretch. Now, here's the thing. Lee is 33 years old. He turned 33 last month in July. He is also making a cap hit of $7 million a year and has this year and 2 more years left. And then you're talking about his 33, 34, and 35-year seasons. You start to think, okay, his production may just start to dip. And I think the question has to be asked, is Anders Lee, did he just have a little slump to end the season where, the last 10 games and the 6 playoff games, maybe he was playing hurt. Maybe he just was going through a slump. Every player does. Or is this the beginning of a decline for Anders Lee? And I tend to lean toward the slump idea. And I'll tell you why. But there are concerns. The big concern to me is this. Anders Lee thrives on tips, rebounds, deflections, getting in front of the net and stirring things up, getting under the skin of the goalie and the defenseman and distracting them and helping his teammates get scoring opportunities and then cashing in on rebounds. All of these things are what Anders Lee does best. The good news is you don't need a lot of speed in your game to do that. The bad news is that down the stretch, he kind of wasn't converting those kind of plays. So to me, it's going to be vital to see what Anders Lee does, especially early in the season. And, maybe the first 20 games of the year will be very telling for the Islanders and the future of Anders Lee. Because even if he's average, even if Anders Lee, after 20 games, let's say, has 11 points, 5 goals, 6 assists, 11 points. I'm okay with that. Every player, especially a goal scorer, is going to go through their hot streaks and cold streaks. But we need the captain to be more consistent and to just prove to everybody that what happened at the end of last season was not due to a decline in his overall level of play and, that he's getting older and slower. Again, speed is not his game anyway, but I think the effort was still there. I have almost never questioned Anders Lee's heart, but I want to see that faster start from the captain this year in order to just put my mind at ease that he is there, he is going to be consistent, and he's going to get the job done for this team again going forward. Because let's face it, we've talked about, okay, if Oliver Wahlstrom can go from, 7 goals to 18 goals, if you can get a full healthy season from Matthew Barzal, if Bo Horvat even gives you 25 goals over the course of 80 games, that's ways the Islanders can get better at some of the things they struggle with. Well, if Anders Lee goes from 28 goals to 15 goals or 18 goals, you got to make them up the other way, and that's a little tougher for this team. So Lee is going to be very important to this team. And whether you think he's declining or whether you think he was just in a slump, him bouncing back is going to be critical for the start that this hockey team needs to get off to in 2023, 2024. We have got a lot more to talk about on today's show. We're going to talk a little bit about offense versus defense and the way the Islanders are building this team. We are all often critical of Lou Lamoriello. I'm going to defend him in a way, coming up in our next segment. But first, today's episode is brought to you by your friends at FanDuel. Football season is about to kick off, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to win all season long. Because right now, when you bet on a Super Bowl winner, you can get bonus bets every time they win during the regular season. Just pick any team to win the Super Bowl, and you'll get bonus bets for every victory. And you can use those bonus bets on point spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So, Giant fans, you think they can get back to the playoffs, win 10, 11 games? That's more bonus bets for you. Aaron Rodgers, Jet fans, has got to be worth some wins. Every time Aaron Rodgers and the Jets win, you get bonus bets if you place your bet on the Jets. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and start earning bonus bets with America's #1 sportsbook. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Check it out for your chance to get bonus bets today. So, offense versus defense. I just wanted to touch on this a little bit. And look, everydayers, I am generally critical of a lot of things that Lou Lamoriello does in the way he runs this team. I like to give praise where praise is due. I think, for example, that the Sorokin contract was a fantastic deal for the New York Islanders. I like to give him credit when he deserves it. But I also think that, again, this team, everydayers, the mantra, a little too slow, they need more speed, more skill, and get younger. Those are my, 3 big categories. And I'm concerned about the lack of prospects overall in the pipeline right now. But we'll get to all that. But overall, when you look at offense versus defense, I wanted to at least touch on that. I went back and I looked at the statistics. The top 11 teams in the NHL last year, of which the Islanders were, 4th or 5th? The top 11 teams in the NHL. The Islanders were 5th in goals against with 217. But of those top 11 teams, all 11 of them made the playoffs. If you kept the puck out of the net, you were much more likely to make the playoffs than if you were just trying to win games 8-6. This is not 1984. Gretzky, Curry, those guys are not on the ice. And we're not winning 8-6 games like we were in the Firewagon 80s. It's just not that style of play. The only reason I'm saying that what Lou Lamoriello is doing by building his team around defense and goaltending makes sense is because of the mess of a salary cap situation that this team is in. And that is largely Lou Lamoriello's fault. So I'm not absolving him in that respect. But when you've got a goalie like Ilya Sorokin, who was, according to the voters, the second best goalie in the National Hockey League last year, second in the Vezina voting, and you've just locked him up to a long-term extension, when you've got a Ryan Pulock and an Adam Pelech, when you've got a team that was top 5 in the league in goals against, and you don't have a lot of cap space to maneuver with, building your team from the goal and the defense out makes the most sense short term. Now, long term, I think it's going to be difficult for this team to get past being that fringe playoff, somewhere between 7th and 10th in the conference, and either just making or just missing the playoffs. Again, injuries, trades, players breaking out. There are a lot of things that will and can happen between now and the start of the playoffs and the end of the regular season. So I'm not saying it can't happen. But when you're $400 and something thousand over the cap right now, it is much easier for this team, based on the players they have in the locker room and under contract, to stick with a defense-first system that has gotten them the success they've had in recent years, rather than try to go out and sign, a Vladimir Tarasenko or an Erik Karlsson. And I'm not saying they shouldn't have gone after some of those offensive players who were available over the last couple of years. But I am saying, given the limitations that this team has, and again, I do largely, not exclusively, but largely think that Lou Lamoriello's approach and philosophy and the way he's utilized the cap space are responsible for that cap crunch and the way this team is built. But given that, and the way that defense gets you to the playoffs, and the fact that your best player, if you were to list the Islanders' top 6 players, Sorokin is definitely number 1, and Pelech and Pulock are definitely in your top 5. That's 3 of your top 5 being defensive guys and or goalies. So I think under those limited, under those limitations, under those difficult circumstances, it makes sense to go defense first. But you've got to have a long-term plan. And the fact that I feel like this team kind of doesn't have a solid long-term plan for when your 33-year-old Anders Lee becomes 35 and 36, for when, Kyle Palmieri and Brock Nelson and J.G. Pajot and all of these guys who are closer to retirement than they are to their prime, maybe, start to slow down. You've got to start having players in place who can take their place, or you're really going to face that long, difficult rebuild. So I understand why Lou Lamoriello is emphasizing goaltending and defense. He kind of made his bed and has to lie in it now. But given the fact that he has made his bed and he doesn't have either the creativity or the opportunity to make an Erik Karlsson type deal like the Penguins did, it makes sense. Now, he can undo that damage at the trade deadline with the right deal at the right time to add that goal scorer and get that dynamic piece. Will he? Well, we've been waiting a couple of years. He still quite hasn't pulled it off. You may want to argue the Horvat deal, but I think this team, with a few tweaks and a few breaks, can be better than last year, but they can also be worse. And, getting back to segment 1, the Anders Lee question, whether he just was in a slump or whether he's in a decline, that's going to be an important factor in determining which way, one of many, that this team heads in the future. All right, we have got more to get to. I have a little bit of news about Zach Parise. So we're going to talk about that and a whole lot more still to come on this episode of the Locked On Islanders podcast. So wanted to talk a little Zach. It's been kind of quiet on the Parise front, but one of our listeners, our good friend Ken from Minnesota, sent an email. Hey, Gil, great to have you back. Hope you're feeling well. Just wanted to check in with an observation about Zach Parise. In years past, he has tuned up for the season by participating in the Beauty League right here in Minnesota. This year, he is not on any roster. It makes me think hopefully he is rehabbing an injury, but realistically, it's more likely that he has hung up his skates. If so, his 20 goals, assists, and tenacity will be sorely missed. So, Ken, I think, first of all, thank you for the information. I think you're right. I think that we don't have any specific information, but I do think that it's looking more and more like whether Zach Parise has made a decision or not, the Islanders seem prepared to carry on without him if need be. And to me, the Julien Gauthier move was very telling because, you got Carson Kuhlman and Julien Gauthier, and, you've already signed Hudson Fasching. You've got a bunch of guys who kind of could fill in and give you some of that, third or fourth line performance that you would get from a Zach Parise. So between all of those guys, you need one or two, and to me, Gauthier and Fasching, for example, could end up on that third line along with J.G. Pageau. That is always something that, would make sense. And Gauthier would give you at least some speed on that fourth line. And Fasching gives you sort of the hustle and the determination of Parise. And if you extrapolate the stats, and it's always tough to extrapolate stats because, Hudson Fasching played 50 games, 10 goals, 19 points. So, that's what, 33, 34 point season over 82 games, but you have to keep that pace. 34 points was Zach Parise, 21 goals, 34 points. Parise was a +7, so not bad. Hudson Fasching, a +10. I think Fasching, he doesn't have the experience that Parise has. He doesn't have the proven pedigree at the NHL level, at least. But he's hungry. He's a hard worker. He's kind of like, I don't want to say a poor man's Zach Parise, but he's kind of like, molded after in some ways, Zach Parise, although he hasn't had the, Zach Parise 30-goal seasons in his prime offensive ability, but I think he could match or come within a few goals of matching Zach Parise if he plays a full 82-game season. If you get 80 games out of Hudson Fasching and he gives you 15, 16 goals, I think that the Islanders could be okay with that and move on from there. All right. It's time now for our Islanders birthday of the day. And Ken, I'm sorry. I want to thank you for the email. And again, you asked me to continue the hints on the birthday of the day. So I'm going to do this real quick before I reveal who it is. A former Islanders first-round pick who was gone after just one season on the island is today's Islanders birthday of the day. And we are a couple of days early on this one. But today's Islanders birthday of the day, Saturday, will be the 42nd birthday of former Islanders winger Taylor Pyatt, the Thunder Bay, Ontario native, 8th overall pick in the 1999 draft by the Islanders. After a 40-goal, 89-point season with the Sudbury Wolves his last year in juniors, came to the island played in 78 games as a rookie, 4 goals, 18 points, 39 penalty minutes. Only, 19 years old at that point, and then dealt to Buffalo. Ends up playing for Buffalo, Vancouver, the Coyotes, the Rangers, and the Penguins before finishing his career in Switzerland in 2014, 2015. Did the Islanders give up too quickly on him? Yeah, I think they did. He never really, he had one really good 20-goal season. That was in 06-07 with the Canucks. Never became a star, never lived up to the 8th overall pick in the draft billing, but played in 859 NHL games, which is unbelievably respectable. 140 goals, 280 points, 430 penalty minutes. But, Islanders, he was gone before he even got here. His most memorable moment as an Islander, November 27th, 2000, at the Nassau Coliseum. Tampa Bay Lightning are the visitors. Kevin Weeks and Dan Cloutier both played in goal for Tampa Bay. Wade Flaherty and John Van Beesbrook both played in goal for the Islanders. But in this game, our Islanders' birthday of the day, Taylor Pyatt, gets his first career NHL goal. It is a game-winning goal as the Islanders beat the Tampa Bay Lightning by a score of 7-4. And again, he played 78 games with the Isles, only scored 4 goals. But you never forget your first NHL goal. And that was a magic moment for Taylor Pyatt. He is our Islanders' birthday of the day. I want to thank everyone again for making Locked On Islanders your first listen every day. Everydayers, tomorrow we have a special episode. And we're going to put it together. You remember Hadi Kalakesh from Locked On NHL Prospects. He has assessed all 32 NHL teams' prospect pool. He is going to talk about his rankings of the Islanders' prospect pool, and I'm going to comment on what he did, and we're going to have a little news and notes on top of it. That'll set us up for next week when we'll start to break down some of the individual prospects. So that's why I waited one more day. We'll have Hadi breaking down the Islanders' prospect pool in depth on tomorrow's show. Until then, have a great day, everybody. Stay safe. And of course, let's go Islanders.